Can you tell us definitively if Larry Page will be there or not?
As far as I know, Melissa, that's not the current plan, but this is a management decision, and they could change their mind at any moment.
Do you think Google should have sent somebody?
I think the management team decided that under the circumstances, they wanted to send Kent, who is the senior global affairs person. He would have been the right person to discuss the issues, but the committee didn't want to hear from Kent.
Do you think that the company, that Google, has done the best it could do to explain, to respond, let's say, to last week's allegations that search results were somehow infected with political bias? I mean, they've relied on trying to explain their algorithms. I can't understand it.
Well, I think the algorithms are very complicated. I think political bias is never entered the search results and how search is determined. I think the search results, there's a deep trust relationship with users. If Google were to change search results so that they didn't reflect what users most wanted to see, people would abandon Google.
Algorithms sound so scientific and so unbiased, but algorithms are programmed by people. And this Google algorithm has been a black box. I mean, every year there are so many updates to this algorithm. It still remains a black box. How does a company, effectively explain that there is no political bias when the algorithm itself is hard to understand?
That's a good question. The algorithm is difficult to understand. I think we have many, many people who basically are constantly tuning the algorithm, looking at what is the search most people want, what's the result they most want back. And that's what drives that search process. I think the algorithm also, it's critical to understand the algorithm has protections in it against people who try to mislead the search result and get their web page to rise up by creating links which are not real and things like that.
So how that makes it complicated. Forgive me for interrupting. I finished your thought.
No,
but how do you determine what results we get? We're getting into an alleyway here, but how do you determine what the results are that people most want? For example, when you put in, as I did, Trump news last week on the day that came up, I would say out of the 100 that I looked at, 85 or 90 were from what I would call mainstream media: CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, BBC, Fox News. They may not think of themselves as mainstream, but to me they are. And very few were from alternative things. So how do you determine that those are the ones people want most?
Well, so based on two things. One is, what do people actually, which site did they actually go to when they do a search? So do they pass 2 or 3 of the things at the top of the search list, the top of the result, and go to one further down? Then that's an indication that maybe that one should rise in importance. So we drive it by that. We drive it by the number of references within the web. How many people reference a story that appears, whether it's in Fox or the New York Times or the Washington Post? How many people reference it? Because that's an indication of how many other people are reading that story.
Can I ask you more broadly? We're watching Twitter and Facebook going to Capitol Hill tomorrow. There's been a lot of speculation about how lawmakers might regulate these social media companies or these tech companies. Should there be more regulation? Is it time to consider new restrictions and new rules for these tech companies?
I think it's very hard to contemplate how you can regulate the tech industry without putting an anchor on this very fast-moving industry, which would harm our competitiveness with respect to other parts of the world.
You mean global companies?
Global companies,
right,
yeah, and they're global companies now. So I think you have to be very careful about it. Look at copyright law. It's still stuck in the 18th century and hasn't been updated to reflect the way in which information is now conveyed to people.
So if you were a lawmaker on Capitol Hill, what would you ask? What do you want to know from these other leaders about where we're going?
I think there are good questions to be asked about how do people who are paying for various things affect what people see, whether it's a news feed or a search. Is it crystal clear whether or not somebody's paying for something in order it rises up and you see it, or are you seeing it because the algorithm determines that's what people most want to see?